In this video, you're going to learn an incredible way to listen in a way that inspires others to follow you, inspires others to open up and share with you, and to help you be incredibly effective in even some of the most challenging kinds of conversations. My name is Tim Francis. I am the founder of a company called Great Assistant. We have helped hire over 500 assistants for entrepreneurs across the United States and Canada, and I've been very lucky to appear on the websites of Forbes and Inc. magazine, and as well as on the stage of NYU Stern in New York City. In this video, I'm going to share with you three main parts when it comes to becoming an incredible listener. I'm going to share with you the proper mindset and approach. I'm going to share with you the simple practice that literally can change how you learn and lead and love, honestly, even into your personal life, not just your business life. And thirdly, what you can do next. Years ago, I was incredibly invested above all else in being right, being viewed as smart, and being justified in every step along the way. And I have to tell you that there were many times when I would win the battle but lose the war. Or perhaps I would feel like I answered all the questions that were coming my way or solved all the problems, but something still didn't seem right. I still didn't feel like connected. I still didn't feel like, hey, me and this person are really, really close again. Then I met an incredible human being. His name is Dr. David Wolfe, and he taught me the practice of reflective listening. Reflective listening was developed through therapy, and it has been used in conflict resolution and is viewed by many therapists and mediators as one of the most single effective tools to help gain understanding, agreement, and ultimately progress in challenging situations. It's not meant to be used all the time, but particularly when there's like an emotional share or something really important being said where we can't risk a misunderstanding. So in learning from Dr. Wolfe the idea of being really great at listening, it really made me think back to the Stephen Covey book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in the book, he talks a lot about seek first to understand and then be understood. And it's one of the most powerful of the 7 habits. How do we exactly go about doing that was what I was wondering, and Dr. Wolfe literally gave me a step-by-step formula on how to do that. Since then, I've used reflective listening in a wide range of scenarios, from the boardroom, when someone is sharing where they are in their business, or perhaps a dissatisfaction they have, be it with a teammate or with their own progress. I've used it in personal scenarios, and have oftentimes been able to navigate situations that are very, very challenging and to make them actually incredibly harmonious and peaceful. Dr. Wolfe has an expression. He says, oftentimes conflict is the doorway to intimacy. So what do we need to do as communicators to make sure that conflict is a doorway to intimacy and not a cliff for the relationship to fall off and into peril? In the time since then, which is probably 14 years ago that I learned about reflective listening, those I've shared it with who've really embraced it, it's been unbelievable to watch their lives evolve. And it's also been really, really precious to see in the relationships that are closest to me, both in business and in my personal life, how there's just been such a psychological safety that's come about, that's allowed everybody to feel close, even in turbulent times. So let's get into the 3 parts of what there is to know about being a world-class listener. As I mentioned, there's the right philosophy or mindset to think from the first place. Secondly, is to think about, is to learn really the 3 elements, the 3-step formula, and then from there, what there is to do next. The right mindset when it comes to listening is to, first of all, realize that we live in a world that is so loaded with domination, submission, right, wrong, win, lose. If you open up the newspaper every single day, all you see is headline after headline after headline that fall into these categories. This country is invading that country. This team beat that team in sports. This politician is complaining or criticizing this other politician. It's all domination, submission, win, lose, right, wrong. And what I propose is that is all a very different place to stand than connection. Connection oftentimes requires us to go a level deeper, and connection requires us to maybe put to the side, even just for a couple minutes, the need to be right, the need to dominate, and the need to win. If you are willing to prioritize connection above winning, losing, dominating, submitting, and being right and wrong, if you're willing to do that, that's already a huge step forward. The next place to stand in terms of mindset or philosophy is to know that almost every single person in every single situation is their own number one greatest expert of themselves. That really everybody, including ourselves, oftentimes we do have the answers to our own problems. We actually don't often need someone to come along and tell us what to do. Now, obviously, if we're in a training situation, if I don't know how to serve a volleyball, then someone needs to show me how to place my elbow and follow through properly. So that would be a training scenario, and that's where I'm gaining skills. So that's actually not what I'm talking about here. That's more training. I'm talking more about problem solving, coaching, where we're really kind of teasing through the details of a situation. And in those kind of troubleshooting situations, try this on for size, that the person who you're communicating with is probably the number one expert of their own lives. Even if they're coming to us with questions, oftentimes they themselves, somewhere deep down inside themselves, maybe it's just off in a blind spot or something, they actually do know what they need to do next. And I think what you've maybe even experienced this yourself is when we self-generate our own answers, we also tend to buy into them more, and we're much more likely to take action on them. So even if you as the listener had the perfect advice, even if you had the absolute prescription for perfection, if ultimately you want to help the other person move forward and get whatever it is they're looking for, helping them discover their own answer typically is going to generate a far superior result. The third and final place to stand when it comes to mindset is to really understand that oftentimes the very first thing people will express to us is not actually the root issue. Oftentimes when human beings are angry, frustrated, resentful, or happy, joyful, fulfilled, excited, really all that is them expressing that they have a need that's been met or unmet. If someone is sad, it's because a need has not been met. Our emotions are a wonderful compass to point us in the direction of what needs are being met or not being met. And then from there, once we can uncover that need, now we can say, okay, is the strategy that I've been using to get that need met or not met, how's that going for me, and would I like to update that? So all of this, by the way, this part about needs, emotions, and strategies is from an incredible book called Nonviolent Communication by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, which I highly recommend. So I can't tell you how many times I felt tempted to react to the very first thing someone says to me. Whether it's a customer who says, you're an idiot, and I don't know, how did I ever believe you? You're an idiot. You don't know what you're doing. It's been a waste of my time, waste of my money, like really kind of coming at me. If I immediately fall out of connection and I fall into winning, losing, domination, submission, being right, being wrong, in that exact moment, I might say, well, no, that's not the truth because of this, that, and the other thing. And well, you didn't do your part. And it just becomes this. Dr. David Wolfe would describe it as we've gone from dialogue, where two people are talking to each other, to two monologues. And Dr. David Wolfe describes how the vast majority of the time, and I agree with this, discussion or communication is often, listening when in communication is oftentimes defined as just waiting for our turn to speak. It's not actually hearing the other side and fully understanding them. It's just waiting for our turn to speak. And so when I've when I've, instead of choosing to defend or be right or win, instead of that, if I commit myself to connecting and listening, instead of pushing back, I might just hear what that person has to say, do a little bit of reflective listening, which I'll teach you about in just a moment. And then from there, that upset customer will actually say, well, yeah, and then that's because of this thing. And then I'll just hold space. And then they'll say, well, then, which makes you think of that thing? And then I'll hold space. And I literally just walk with them through their world until finally they kind of diffuse themselves. And now we connect and can make great progress. Same thing with a staff member. If a staff member is, upset or dissatisfied with something, oftentimes I'll hear them, I'll hold space, and then we get to this beautiful point of connection. And actually also in my family and personal life as well. Oftentimes when I can play that role and I can do so in excellence, we oftentimes get to a really great resolution pretty quickly. So let's just remember that we need to put winning, losing, domination, submission, and right, wrong to the side in favor of listening and connecting. Now, that's not to say that you are abandoning the view that you might be right or wrong. It's just saying we're going to put it on pause for a moment, and we're going to do something else. We're going to walk into the other person's world and connect and see what life is like for them. The second thing, as I mentioned, is to make sure that we are understanding that the very first thing that someone says to us is not necessarily the main thing, that we need to remember that oftentimes when people are speaking, they're speaking out of emotion, and really the very first thing they're saying is not the root cause, and we need to stick with them as we help them find it. Okay, so that's the right mindset when it comes to being a world-class listener. The second part of what I'm sharing with you today is how do we actually do reflective listening. So reflective listening sounds incredibly simple, and it is incredibly simple. I would also tell you that reflective listening is a habit, and like any other habit, it's hard in the beginning, but it gets a lot easier later. And probably the number one challenge you'll run into with reflective listening is not necessarily understanding how to do it, but rather the emotional regulation that it requires, especially in the beginning when you're first getting used to it. When you feel that heat come up, or that tidal wave, or that tension of wanting to defend or wanting to win or wanting to be right, to just kind of like let that calm down and stay rigorous and committed to the process of reflective listening. And while it may be like your eyes want to pop out of your head in the short term, I will tell you that within a minute or so, when you see yourself sticking rigorous to the process of reflective listening, and you see how the speaker is now evolving and solving their own problems, and there's great progress being made, you'll be greatly, greatly rewarded. Okay, so what is reflective listening? Reflective listening is when we are hearing someone share, and we're the listener, and instead of responding, instead we reflect or mirror back what we heard. Now, the specific formula that I encourage you to use is to listen for emotion and listen for content. I think you'll find that the content part is probably easier. So if someone says, I had a really bad day at work today, the content is they had a bad day at work. But what's the emotion? The emotion might be they're sad, they're frustrated, they're resentful, they're regretful. And oftentimes that part is harder for us because typically we as human beings coming through the school system and even into university or college, we oftentimes aren't given a very big list of emotional words, like emotion words. Oftentimes the best that we have is good, bad, glad, sad, happy. It's just kind of like negative, positive. Like it's just, we're really kind of hamstrung by our emotional vocabulary. So good news, with practice, like anything else, you'll get better and better at it. So what about if someone comes to me and is really heated? Let's say it's an upset customer. So that, and I've literally had this before. It was after a boardroom meeting where I shared an opinion that I felt was fair and grounded. The person in the hot seat, though, they came back at me and they felt extremely angry with what I had to share. And so, I received a message that was just like, you idiot, you're the biggest hypocrite, how can you say that? You're supposed to be a leader. You need to, walk by, you need to walk your talk. I demand a complete refund, which by the way was $30,000. This is completely a joke. I can't believe that people trust you. And I was like, wow, that is probably the biggest ripper of an email I have ever received in my whole life. And so what were my options? There's a fork in the road there, right? One way I could have gone would be to say like, well, no, the terms of service says no refunds, and you know what you're getting into ahead of time, and you could have spoken up in the middle of the meeting to share your dissatisfaction instead of sending this email 2 days later. Like, I could have gone down that road, and it probably would have been very satisfying, honestly, in the short term, just be like, F you in return, right? But I didn't. I was wiser than that. I'd received more training than that, and I chose instead to go the reflective listening route. So I said to the client, hey, I'm hearing that you're feeling really dissatisfied. You're feeling really frustrated. And when you think of your experience, it was just an absolutely horrible experience. Would you be willing to tell me more about that? Now think about that response. I'm walking with them in their world, and I'm asking to hear more about it. So this particular client came back and said, well, yeah, because I didn't like it when this happened and that happened and the other thing, and this was unprofessional and blah, blah, blah. And I simply held space and I said, hey, I'm hearing that it was really below the standard of professionalism that you expect. And it really, really, really ticked you off. You feel angry. In fact, you maybe even feel enraged that, this is how this meeting went. So this client continues and says, well, yeah, you know what, like a group setting just isn't the right fit for me, I think. Like, I get what you're going for, Tim, but I just kind of don't feel like, this is the right format for me. Like, to be honest, I've been following you for a long time. I really admire what you're up to. I think you're a really smart guy. I just had a bad experience, and honestly, it just wasn't for me. Okay, did you hear the switch there? He's gone from being critical of me to now saying that the situation is just not a fit for him. And so I replied. Once again, I could have responded, but instead I stuck with mirroring. And I simply said, hey, I hear that the group setting doesn't feel real great to you. And I'm actually hearing that deep down inside you're feeling disappointed because you've had a lot of respect for me and you've been, really looking forward to working with me. And so to be where you are is like, it's a long ways from what you were hoping all the way down to what you actually experienced. And I imagine that'd be extremely disappointing. Have I understood you correctly? And the client said, yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Tim, I really do need help in my business, and was really hoping that you'd be able to help me. It just sucks to be where we are. So it was clear to me now that we'd gone from ultimate escalation all the way down to now, we're not sitting across the table from each other, but we're now actually sitting side by side. And once I got that sense, I said, okay, got it. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate your perspective. I was wondering if we could look at some alternatives. And so the client said, sure, what are you thinking? And I said, okay, you've invested $30,000 to be a part of this high-level mastermind. It's clearly not a fit. And I'm wondering, what if we just converted the $30,000 into one-on-one private consulting? My consulting rate is $1,000 an hour, so we can just call it 30 sessions over the coming, maybe it's every other week, for the next 15 weeks, or if you want to do once a month for the next few years, whatever that looks like, I'd be happy to flip to that kind of format. That way, we're probably using a format that fits for you better, it sounds like, and it also sounds like you would still get the opportunity to work with me, and on my end, I would love the opportunity to be a part of your success story. I wouldn't have brought you into our group coaching program, or our mastermind, I should say, if I didn't believe in you and what you're doing with your business. What do you think of that? And the client said, you know what, Tim, I think that would be a far better structure. I'm just way better one-on-one. And so that's what we did. So literally in that maybe 15-minute conversation, by me just holding space, I ended up literally saving $30,000. And I also ended up having the opportunity to help this client. And what's incredible is beyond the first $30,000 that they've invested, it's actually gone a lot further than that. We've become great friends. We hang out and have dinner when we get the opportunity. I know about his family. He knows about me. So it's just been this amazing relationship that's carried on. And on top of that, I've been able to help him save literally millions of dollars. No kidding, millions of dollars in his business, and to also expand profit by millions of dollars. And then obviously I've enjoyed the financial gain that I've gotten from continuing to have a working relationship as well. So, I promise you that the emotional heat that you're going to feel is one of the biggest roadblocks And Dr. David Wolfe, in his incredible book, Relationships That Work, he's created a list of what he calls roadblocks. So roadblocks are what we need to be on high alert for to ideally avoid when we're in the process of holding space. And a lot of these roadblocks may come off as being even positive or helpful, but actually they get in the way. When someone is on the journey of the surface to the next level down, the next level down, the next level down, kind of like I've just demonstrated, that speaker, we can't it's very unproductive usually for us to roadblock them, to interject with anything other than just holding space and listening and mirroring back. Now, some obvious roadblocks would be if we started giving them advice, right? So client says, I want a $30,000 refund. And I said, I think that you have a bad attitude and I really think that you should consider going to therapy. Okay, that's giving advice. How helpful is that, right? Another would be defending. That's another roadblock. So customer says, $30,000, I want a refund. And I say, well, that's not my problem. You signed and you paid and the agreement says no refunds, right? Another would actually be humorizing. So normally we think of humor as a good thing, but humorizing could actually be something like, oh, you're so funny, $30,000, your real card. Yeah, we can talk sometime, but that's, you get what you put into something, right? And you put $30,000 in, so hopefully you can get it as much as you can back, right? Another is platitudes, another is teaching, another is sermonizing. If you've ever had the experience of having a bad day and maybe you go home and someone in your family says, how's your day? And you say, it was really bad. And they just slap you on the back and say, oh, cheer up, tomorrow's a fresh day. Like you as the speaker are no further ahead. You still feel like crap. Whereas if that person said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. It sounds like you've had a really bad day. Would you be willing to tell me more with that? And you're going to say, yeah, I had a big deal on the table. I didn't think it was going to work out. Your listener then says, oh, I hear that you're feeling really disappointed. You're really hoping that deal to come through. Yeah, do you see the difference? Like it's just absolutely night and day. So in terms of what you can do next, now that you've learned about reflective listening, and by the way, I would say it's probably more important that you emphasize the emotion than the content. You could get all the content exactly right, but if you don't hit the emotion right, you're not going to have the same effect with the person you're listening to. So think of it maybe 70% emotion, 30% content or something like that. So what you can do next is I highly recommend that you do three things. So the first is I highly recommend that you listen to Nonviolent Communication by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. That book is just an incredible book to help us understand what's really going on in communication. It's a great audiobook, so if you're someone who prefers to listen while you drive or work out or something like that, no need to flip pages in a book. And there aren't like a ton of diagrams in the print version either, so it makes a really great audiobook. Then from there, I highly recommend that you read Relationships That Work by Dr. David Wolfe. Again, that's Relationships That Work by Dr. David Wolfe, also available on Amazon. I don't think it's on Audible, so that one is a print book. And if you feel inspired by the book, I highly recommend you actually take his 3-day workshop, which is called the Foundational Course, through his organization, which is called Sattva-Tov. In the last 14 years, I've done that course 4 times, kind of at different chapters of my life, and every time I do it, I get something new. And it's in that class that he gives live experiences of reflective listening. And the third thing that I recommend that you do, and I'd say these are in kind of no particular order, is actually to try, just to practice. And I actually recommend that you practice out of the heat of the moment. Like if you've got a partner who's threatening to break up with you or a staff member who's threatening to leave, that's kind of not the best time to be getting your rookie reps in. Like let's get our rookie reps in out of the heat of the moment when the stakes are way lower. So consider approaching a peer, a family member, or a friend, and simply tell them like you're looking to work on your listening skills and you're wondering if they'd be willing to sit with you on a FaceTime or Zoom call or something for 15 minutes. And they might say, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. And at that point you say, yeah, all I'm looking is for you to express yourself on something that's important to you. Like we don't want to talk about the weather. We want to talk about something like maybe a little bit of substance to it, like maybe what direction your life is going, your career is going, something like that. And all I'd like to do is just hold space. And so, okay, so your practice partner says sure, and off they go. And they might start talking about, their job, or they might start talking about like, concern they have about their health or their parents' health or something like that. And your only job is to reflect back to content and emotion, content and emotion, content and emotion. Notice where you get, where you feel tempted to take that off-ramp into roadblocks. Notice where you feel an emotional off-ramp that's tempting you towards, responding to get into right, wrong, domination, submission, winning, losing. And hopefully that shouldn't come up too much because you're not necessarily dealing with a real and present conflict. This is why we practice out of the heat of the moment. I think what you'll find is getting good at avoiding the roadblocks first is a good first practice before you compound that with a real life interpersonal situation where you are personally invested, which is a spot where you would then be dealing with not only the roadblocks, but also the emotional management of the heat of the situation. I recommend that you start those practices, those practice sessions. You don't need to read either of the books that I've recommended before your first practice session. What I would say is do a practice session, order the books, and try to get 3-4 practice sessions in per week. And while you're waiting for the books to arrive, and then from there kind of chip away at listening to the books over the course of a month. And if you've got 3-4 practice sessions in per week for 4 or 5 weeks, and you also listen to both of those books or read both of those books, I think at the end of 30 days, you would be in an absolutely incredible spot. Your listening ability would go to a whole new level, and those around you would just be absolutely dumbstruck, just absolutely amazed with how far you've come and how much more they feel like they can connect with you. So that is reflective listening. If you found this to be helpful, please do like this video, do subscribe as well, and also consider sharing this with someone. Not from the place of like, hey, idiot, you need listening skills, but perhaps from a place of, hey, I'm trying out this new listening skill called reflective listening. This video is really inspiring. I thought you might be curious to know what I'm up to. And just something like that is way less confrontational than like, yo, you need this. My name is Tim Francis from Great Assistant, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you.